Is there any philosophers on the album on the cover?
What if Sergeant Pepper's? I don't know, George.
Yeah.
Is it?
Don't know.
Was it a loaded question?
No, I didn't know the answer. It was a general question. To have a look. Because if Descartes on the front cover of Sergeant Pepper's, that'd be blow my mind.
That would be a result, wouldn't it? That would be a result. Absolutely.
Especially when Jamie starts singing it at the end.
Nah. That's all you get.
What was that? Was that a rendition of Hey Jude? Is Hey Jude on that album?
Yeah.
It's the song that you can't finish. Hey Jude. Whenever you play it live, you just can't end it. It just doesn't end.
It's a brilliant song, isn't it?
That's all right.
Let's have a look.
Don't you think, though, my favourite Beatles-related joke is, don't you think the Beatles are all dying in the wrong order?
Why?
Well, because you would want John Lennon to be alive the longest.
All right.
Then you'd want, what's his name? Can't remember his name now. The other fella. Well, you'd want Paul McCartney. You'd want Paul McCartney dead first because he's an atrocity to the world. And Ringo's neither here nor there, is it? And George Harrison was you'd want him alive for as long as possible. Do you not think?
I think we'll let them all.
Yeah, I don't know. My other favourite Beatles thing is I think it was John Lennon was asked in an interview, was Ringo Starr one of the best drummers in the world? And he said he's not even the best drummer in the Beatles.
No, the nearest we've got is Carl Jung and Karl Marx.
Karl Marx?
Oh yeah. I think I can.
Oh God.
So this is beer and ideas, or ideas and beers, or whatever it is.
I've got something called Shake the Tree, orange infused beer from Aldi.
Yeah. Wow.
Big sponsors for this, didn't we?
There'll eventually be adverts and everything. We'll be coining it in with this great idea.
Yeah.
George thought all that out.
Yeah. He's the accountant. Should we say who we are? We should probably say who we are.
Yeah.
Jamie.
No, I'm Jamie.
Hello, Jamie. George.
So should we just be Jamie, George, and Stephen?
Absolutely.
Like band.
Yeah. I think we do that. We don't need to have fake names, do we? Really?
No.
Maybe we should. All right, and so we've all got beer.
Yeah. We need ideas. So
this is where the problem's going to be.
Shall I introduce the first idea?
Yeah. Hang on. I get me pretentious philosophy pipe out.
Well, there's a man, 17th century in France, called Descartes. If I pronounce that correctly, we'll talk about the pronunciation. So like Descartes or Descartes, as in the car you would use through the day.
Probably. This always worries me because I'm kind of, I don't know what you guys are like, but I suffer from imposter syndrome. So the last thing you want to do when you suffer from imposter syndrome is pronounce something incorrectly, isn't it? Like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure when they pronounce Socrates, Socrates. That's just
Socrates.
It's one of the funniest moments ever. And Keanu Reeves is just an absolute star anyway. But are we going with Descartes, or do we pronounce the T?
George?
Descartes.
Descartes?
I'm with that, yeah, definitely.
Oh, Descartes. So Descartes was probably most famous for coining the phrase, I think, therefore I am. Yeah?
Yeah.
And he come up with that phrase after he had some kind of thought experiment, I would say is probably the best way to describe it. And he reached a point in his philosophical life, or in his life in general, and he's thinking about his own knowledge and how his own knowledge, his previous knowledge, infected his current knowledge. I think I may be wrong on this, but I think he used the analogy of fairies. He believed in fairies when he was a child, and that was real to him at that point. So as an adult, he knows very well that fairies didn't exist. Well, that's not a spoiler for anybody. So therefore, he had a kind of a rid thoughts from his mind, and so then he had a look at all his thoughts and believed and used the analogy of a bucket full of apples. So he said he had a bucket full of apples, and he had one apple in there, or a number of apples in there, that were rotten. They would infect the rest of the apples in the barrel. So what you need to do was empty out his apples, empty out his beliefs, and then examine each one individually and place them back into the barrel. Therefore, nothing's infecting it. So every thought and belief is true to now and where he was at that moment in time. And this is where it comes from, because the first belief he had was, I think, therefore I am. It was the first apple he returned back to the barrel. And how he come to that, he realised that the only thing he could know for certainty was that he was having a thought, that there was a thought. And so therefore his own reality was kind of confirmed at that moment. I think, therefore I am. You can't say he didn't know that he had existed for as many years as he had done. He didn't know that because the universe could have been created in 5 minutes ago, and all his thoughts could have been transformed and put into his head. The whole world could have been created 5 minutes ago, as the Matrix did. I think the Matrix uses the same analogy. Is the only thing you can be really aware of is you're having that thought at that moment in time. Therefore, I think, therefore I am. So that was his analogy, his bucket full of apples. So I think that's what we're going to talk about today. So how do we apply that to social work in general, and specifically to social work teaching?
I suppose it's about the examined life then, isn't it? Is that what we're saying?
Mm-hmm.
That you have to examine kind of... are we saying you have to examine kind of everything? If you're going to live your best life, if we're going to kind of, reach the top of Maslow's pyramid or whatever, and be self-actualized, you have to examine all the various aspects of your thoughts and who you are. Is that kind of where we're at?
I would say so.
I wonder whether it even starts on a more basic level than that. And when me and Jamie do some training with social work students, we often use the phrase, or I think I do, Jamie, we've got to do better than common sense. So someone that's willing to train as a social work student, working across disadvantage, race, all where they might have initial prejudices or these things, they have to be willing to be open to things that someone offering advice, the man on the bus advice, wouldn't be willing to explore, if you see what I mean. And I think that's where our professional role and what people are training as social workers needs to go through. So that's where it strikes a chord with me. So I just don't think you can be a social worker, or really pretty much any profession that works with disadvantage, or any sort of group that can be alienated, and without that willingness to do this sort of examining and that Descartes talks about.
So you're saying there, George, sorry, Stephen, you're saying there, George, is that the common sense rules, you would think, all of you what's in your barrel, and you've got to kind of take them out and examine them a bit, and look at that, because it hasn't worked, this common sense thing, and then what the man on the bus would say to you, that hasn't worked. So I need to kind of have reevaluate my knowledge base. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we as far as possible, we have to do a good job of not bringing that level of pollution's maybe too strong a word, but sort of influence on our thinking, because we are tasked with practicing outside of that. Maybe that's too much of an ideal, but it's a process you have to at least be striving towards, if you see what I mean. I think in reality you can't clear out the bucket, but that's probably a separate discussion. But I think it's the willingness to do that would naturally make you a better person, better teacher, better doctor, better social worker. Or you're left with these sort of pre-existing states where you're just doing no better than the advice of the man in the street. Does that make sense? Or am I not explaining very well?
Yeah, it does. It does. I suppose. So we're exploring ourselves kind of through a reflective process. So through the reflective process, we're we're challenged by things at work? When is this when maybe our personal values are challenged? We need to get them out of the barrel and have a look at them and think, why is it that I feel challenged by this? And I suppose I'm thinking of this idea that kind of there's something in our unconscious, and I wonder how we get at those thoughts. That's one thing, but there's something in our unconscious, something in the way we've been brought up, something in the way that, what our history that we bring with us that we need to kind of explore, don't we? And I think actually part of the social work program of education is to get people to explore those common sense ideas about how they think the world works, isn't it? And examine them. I think is that what you're saying? I think that's what you're saying, that we need to do that.
Yeah, that's about it. I mean, let's think of an example. So, say you're a newly qualified teacher. It's not too much of a stretch to imagine the naughty children in your class aren't worth bothering with. Just focus on the ones that are willing to learn. That could be some pre-existing idea in your head. Well, if you march through your profession always believing that, you're going to fail a proportion of children in your class.
Yeah.
Without being willing, well, why is that child misbehaving? Why is this? Why? Chasing it down the road like Descartes did. The teacher that does that, I think, is naturally going to be a better teacher. And I think I'm just using that example as a very simplistic one. And
I think when you kind of establish, and there's years and ideas, podcast, if that's what's going to be, is how far do social work students need to go? Because I would expect a social work student who come into one of our lectures turns around and really kind of looks at their political beliefs and where they come from, and so maybe even changes them. We don't know, or their religious beliefs. Or is that too far? Is it a stretch too far? Is it to ask somebody to challenge their own religious beliefs, something that they've had within them since as far back as they can remember? Is that something that happens, throughout your life as you constantly change that? So when we're having students coming to, what's your expectation? So political beliefs, you would say, yes, I would expect you to do that. Anything about your views regarding prejudice, you would expect that to be challenged through the course. I know when I did mine, I didn't realise I had these prejudices, but I had prejudice towards the middle class and the upper class, and I certainly had that, and I certainly had to go through a process of challenging that. So taking them thoughts out the barrel, reevaluating them and putting them back in. But how much are we asking? Or how much do we expect? So things like religious views, some really strong, deep-seated views, I don't think that would. I don't think it's the time to have them. But then, how can you reevaluate everything that you're thinking if you don't do that? So I don't know what the answer is.
I think it's interesting you raise religion, because religion is often the fuel that activates people to want to come into some sort of helping profession, isn't it? They feel that in the literature it talks about professions like social work being a calling almost, that we're called to a profession. And I suppose what you're saying there, I think, is that if we have views that we've left unchallenged, we have to challenge those views as part of picking the apples out of the barrel to figure out which ones are influencing the way that we think, and are they influencing the way we think to a position where we discriminate and disadvantage people, or are they just influencing the way we think and actually it makes us want to be more helpful and more supportive and that kind of. So I think it's one of those things, isn't it, where just using the religion as an example, it could be a strong motivator, or it could construct negative ideas about people, I suppose.
I think Descartes had the same. I don't know whether he would class it to. I think the times he was living in, when I think everyone in the Western world, or the majority of people in the Western world, were Catholic, or the Church of England. I'm not too sure. My religious history is not at its best. I know Descartes was Catholic.
He was Catholic, yeah.
Yeah, and so he had some thoughts about religion, and I think they were quite fixed in his mind, and did they affect his ability to reevaluate all his apples? I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever get a chance to ask him either.
I think that's one of the things that I struggle with is in that how do you examine one apple at a time? Because actually, the apple I'm currently, like, if one apple started to be rotten, another apple might look not rotten, but it could already be kind of infected with spores and the like that kind of mean it's going to start to be infected, because ideas beget other ideas, don't they? And they all influence each other. And I think the bit that I struggle with around Descartes' idea of this is how do you identify a unique thought so you can look at it purely in isolation, when actually I'm not religious now, but I was, but I know that clouds some of the ways that I think, because for the first 30 years of my life, I was brought up in a religious household, continued with my faith as I kind of struggled through it to kind of eventually get to the point where I turned my back on it, but it still influences me. So how can I look at the idea of religion and think, right, I'll dismiss that without dealing with other ideas that's influenced and fueled? So I struggle with this idea of being able to break it down, because I know he does say, doesn't he, you have to keep breaking the idea down into smaller and smaller and smaller ideas till you kind of get to a single idea. I struggle with being able to do that, if I'm being honest. George, you're nodding sagely and haven't said anything for a little while.
No. Well, I think I hit on before. I think, Stephen, just the willingness to examine is enough. We're not teaching philosophy where we're going to take everyone back to 2 + 2 = 4, or the very basis of logic or anything like that. It's, I think, is people that want to progress, people in the social work profession, it's just a willingness, isn't it? To put all the cards on the table and have a genuine consideration of them. I think the full DIY do-over, what you're talking about, is probably more, I think it's of a different order that we can ask. I think just a willingness to think, are my values the right values? How am I working with this family? Is something I've, a bit like what you're saying, are my pre-existing views somehow influence my decision making here? The person that asking those questions might not be the finished article, but it's definitely on the right path. And I think that's probably good enough, I would suggest.
And I suppose we've all been there. We all social work, so many years ago now, and it's a massive undertaking, isn't it? It's because I think you start off with your early learning when you're looking at how society works, how the brain works, and how the laws all kind of fit together. And it's very much a light bulb moment, isn't it? All of a sudden you're kind of thinking, I can't understand how things fit together. I didn't realize I didn't know this before until it starts to happen. So you go through that process. I suppose what we're saying, if I'm right, is that continues on, and it's not something that kind of ends with social work qualification, is it? Something you were saying about your religious beliefs, it took you 30 years to have a change of mind. But it goes with social work. I mentioned, that my problem with people from different classes to myself. And I think that's continued on. I was very much a strong socialist. I always think I had a Che Guevara t-shirt on when I first started my social work qualifications at university years ago. But now I think I don't think I could pin myself down to being a socialist now. And I don't think 20 years ago I could have ever said that. But I think my views are much more broader now. And I think it's our journey, isn't it? And I think your social career starts here, or certainly puts wherever you were at, all amount of knowledge that you receive when you get your training. And I think as long as you're a reflective practitioner, and it doesn't end when you get your robes on and your cap and gown and you get your certificate, and it continues on that level of reflection throughout your career. And I think that's what you want to see, is some growth within yourself, and I think that's a normal process. So I don't think it's kind of when you first start your degree, you empty all your apples out, re-examine them, put them back in. I think it's a case of you're doing that throughout, aren't you? You're constantly re-evaluating your belief system, and I think some of the things I believed a year ago are probably slightly changed and adjusted as a result of some of the books I've read or conversations I've had with you guys, and that's what you want, isn't it? be in a constant state of reevaluating your Descartes apples?
I think so. I think so. There's one thing that I often say to students, which is, in my view, is the best social workers are the ones that know themselves the best, because they know what triggers them. They know what their hang-ups are, because we've all got them. They know where they're they know where their lines are, and they kind of understand their weaknesses, where they are prone to kind of, that man on the bus common sense thinking rather than professional kind of thinking. And if you know and understand those places in your mind, then you can at least attempt to try and do something about them, can't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Stephen, have you had to deal with any views that you don't feel are compatible with tradition, the social work values with students? Like, I don't know, maybe being anti-LGBT or any of. Have you ever had to deal with anything like that in the classroom?
Not really, but there is something that I feel we often have to deal with, which is you get people with very fixed views, which are kind of, which do align probably closely to social work values. And just as an example, we often social work and the social work program, we often have people who would identify as feminists and often radical feminists, and I'm very comfortable with that, and that's absolutely fine. But I think what I want social work students to be able to do is take the ideas that fuel them to have that kind of political position and examine them, which is exactly what we're talking about, and be able to be critical of their own views, even however strongly held. And I think if you can be critical of your own views and pull them apart and then reconstruct them, you're then in a stronger position. But I think sometimes people adopt a position without being able to deconstruct and then reconstruct that position. And I would like students, I'd like everybody to be able to kind of do that. Look at the other ideas. One of the things when talking about theory with students is students often accept theory as being kind of, well, that's how it is. It's that way. And I think you have to be able to pull that apart to figure out how useful it is to you. And I think people need to do that with their own ideas.
And I think an analogy I often use, and which I use when I'm challenging myself, is I'd say the analogy: if in a situation where nurses' pay is cut, then we'd have a lot of people from the feminist movement would say, well, the majority of people are women, so we're going to stand up and we're going to fight against this. Then we'd have a lot of socialists and a lot of people from working class backgrounds, so we're going to fight against this. Then we're going to have a lot of people from ethnic minority backgrounds saying, hang on, there's a lot of people who are in the nursing profession who are black, so we're going to fight against this. And a lot of people, generalising here, a lot of people maybe from the LGBT community, so we're going to fight about this. And then you might even have the conservatives turn around saying, hang on, if we're going to be doing this, we're going to cause some imbalancing because the people earn less money and they're not going to spend so much money in the shops in the surrounding areas and the local businesses will. So, and you could continue that line of argument on, and everybody, the majority of groups in society would have a say about nurses' pay being cut. So why look at it from one point of view? Instead of being a socialist, a feminist, anything like that, anything with an ist or an ism, look at it from a wider. So when we're looking at apples, each individual apple is saying, oh, this might be on this might be on that. And it's a collective thing, isn't it? It affects for all. Nurses' wages being dropped, so it affects for all. So let's kind of look from a much more rounded viewpoint.
That's interesting. One thing that was, I think, the last sort of train we got into talking about, but it's to chime with what you said. There's this funny position social work's in where we seek to be anti-oppressive and we practice, but we do the most oppressive things, remove children from mothers. And also, I was hitting upon the class thing a little bit. The children that we remove are far more likely to be the children of black and ethnic minority people, the people in the bottom half of society, if not the bottom 10%. People with mental health disorders are more likely to face the state. Every group you've listed is far more likely to be removed. So a social worker would have wrote the report, a manager would have approved that report. They're the ones that take to court, and it just marches forward. So it's like the elephant in the room, that the profession that should be most, what's the word, less sort of parochial about who they're picking on, ends up picking on the exact same people they should be. Every textbook says they shouldn't.
Well,
I don't know what the answer is to that, but it's definitely an observation.
Yeah, well, I think, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because there was a Twitter feed that I followed and managed to stop myself from commenting on about somebody was criticising the position that some people think that social workers are simply agents of the state, and I think they are, because whatever we do, because we're employed in local government and pass down policy from central government, we have to deliver that, because ultimately we work. These people ultimately are paying our mortgages and paying for our cars and putting food on the table because we work for them. So we have to kind of do their bidding. And I was having a conversation today with somebody, which was how can social workers ever be radical when they work in organisations where, at the minute and for a significant part of the last 20 or 30 years, have been dictated to by right-wing ideology, and I include the kind of Blair government and stuff in that as well. They've dictated views of family, views of addiction, those kind of things. Those have been dictated to us, how we work with those people. So it doesn't surprise me that children are removed from those groups, because those are the groups that the people who are dictating the rules want to see the children removed from, because they don't meet their ideal of how children should be looked after, And again, today, talking to somebody, I was using the analogy of kind of a card game, where like we decide to play a card game, and I deal you your hand, and I deal me my hand, and only I know the rules, but you still have to play your hand. And I think it's a bit like that when we talk about parenting.
We'll play in my office.
I mean, I don't know much about children's social work, to be honest, but it sometimes strikes me that parents are criticised for their parenting capacity, but nobody's told them what the rules are. What are they trying to achieve? What are they trying to meet? And it's like that card game. You've got your hand of cards, and you need to play that hand of cards, but you don't know what the trump suit is or whatever, And that troubles me, because I don't think we can ever kick against the system while we're part of a government machine.
Yeah. It's very interesting. So it's a theory I've had, and I think this is maybe an original thought. There's an old philosophy of the God of the gaps. So whenever science moves on a step, wherever the gap is, wherever the bit that's left behind. So say the bit before the Big Bang, that's where God is. So whether there's a bit unexplored by science, that's where God is. If you do that in reverse, you can say the gap is where the devil is. So think of all the well-meaning legislation that we've got: the Children's Act, good piece of legislation, the Mental Health Act, and all the iterations. There's loads of protections for the individual. There's loads of safeguards. There's loads of positive stuff there, but with people being symptomatic of falling through the gaps of society, that creates this gap. And when it's writ large, despite all the parts being well-meaning, because of these sort of disconnects, the gaps, that's the devil. So that's why it ends up exerting that sort of pressure on the people that it almost by definition tries to avoid. So I think it's a very difficult concept, but I could definitely. It's like, so you could have a well-meaning organization, but the bits in between do the damage, if you see what I mean. Does that make sense, guys?
You should probably think of kind of, I don't know, what are the takeaways from this? What are the bits of advice that we would What would we want social work students or current practitioners to kind of, in terms of Descartes' apples, what would we kind of want them to do?
I think my thought would be is let's have a look at a lot of what thoughts and beliefs are, and reevaluate them, which relate to our social work values. But as of the rest of it, I don't think it's realistic that we can take everything out and reevaluate and put it all back in. And I think a social work kind of represents a journey throughout your life, isn't it? Of constant reflection and constant studying, just to make sure you're doing the job right. Doing some of the things that George highlighted before. This was a constant reevaluation of looking at all your beliefs and your thoughts, and not having some kind of fixed idea of what the world should be. Otherwise, we're going to drift into the same problem as we see is in 52% of the country. And I'm not meaning that just for the whole Brexit equation, but I think we'll have a large majority in the country who have fixed beliefs, and I think you've seen that with all the issues regarding Black Lives Matter, Brexit, the whole Trump issues. You have a certain set. I think you have a very large amount of society which have their apples in a cart, and the lid's very, very fixed and bolted down, and nothing gets reevaluated. And so all them thoughts are kind of mixing together in almost some kind of soup, or cider even. So I think,
Like cider.
Yeah, like cider. So I think you need to constantly just reevaluate your thoughts. I know from the whole Black Lives Matter movement that was going on, my views have changed up and down and around all the way through this. Because initially I'm thinking, well, I'm not really comfortable with Black Lives Matter. I think all lives matter. And then I thought, well, hang on. And then I changed my mind again, and I've changed my mind again, I've changed my mind again. I'm constantly reevaluating this and thinking, right, what does this mean? And I think what I've come to, the conclusion I've come to is that it means different things for different people at different times. So, and I think we'll see lots of pockets of society all arguing from the one little island, thinking everyone means the same as what I mean. Everyone's apples are the same. This was Black Lives Matter, for example. But everyone's, it's like social constructionism, isn't it? Everyone's view of what that is very, very different. So you're not having a proper dialogue and having a proper debate, a proper discussion. All you're kind of doing is just shouting, this is what I believe. So people aren't reevaluating their thoughts, and so people aren't having these discussions and dialogues. People are just shouting. And so I think we need to be constantly kind of looking at where we are and reevaluating that, and then we can develop the social workers, and then we can support people as much as we can in the best way. I meant that'd be really brief.
Let brevity be your watchword. Let's have a takeaway. Yeah. 10 minutes later, Jamie comes up for air. No, I agree. I agree with that. That I think as a society we've got into the position of we just shout our view the loudest until we're heard. And so I think for us as social workers, I think that constant reflective cycle of exploring what things mean, and and being willing to kind of get it wrong in those conversations, but having those conversations, dialogue's everything, isn't it? You learn so much from just opening up and talking to people, and trying to understand where they're coming from, and I think that's important. If I may not agree with you, but I'd like to kind of understand where you're coming from, because that'll help me, figure out what's going on here. George, take away.
Yeah, I think something that sort of formed in my mind as we discussed this sort of polarity between we do the most oppressive things, and the antidote to that is to be the willingness to consider your views all the time. So we've both got this sort of organizational state level where we'll have to act as social workers, or 90% of us act within those roles. The only antidote we can offer as the individual social worker is that willingness to be reflective and reevaluate things. So that creates that balance practitioner, and that's probably the best. Well, it's not a neat definition, but it's probably a good definition of a social worker that you want to be working with you, someone that has that willingness.
Yeah.
I like the use of the word kind of balanced in there, and I think that's the important thing, isn't it? To be able to kind of balance up the kind of state intervention with the personal kind of connection, with the kind of position that people find themselves in that you're trying to work with, trying to kind of balance all that up to arrive at productive outcomes for people, I suppose. So yeah, I like that word balance. I think that's important. So yeah, examine your apples.
Exactly.
Chuck out the bad ones.